The subcommittee will be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I want to welcome everyone to this morning's hearing. Thank you to our subcommittee members that are here and to Secretary Raimondo for being here with us as well. The Department of Commerce's fiscal year 25 budget request totals $11.4 billion, which is $654 million, or a 6% increase over the fiscal year 24 enacted level. This includes initiatives related to bolstering trade enforcement, innovations in manufacturing technology, economic development, and many others, all initiatives that are vital to American prosperity. I'm pleased to see increases requested for workforce development initiatives and strengthening supply chain security. The Department of Commerce's mission to spur economic growth and opportunities for all Americans grows more and more important every day. We're facing foreign economic influences and challenges that can only be halted by prioritizing domestic competition and American labor. From outbound investment strategies to improving industrial standards, the Department of Commerce is on the front line in our fight to combat China economically. Through hearings like this one and a close examination of the budget priorities that you submitted, I, along with my colleagues, will ensure the Department of Commerce uses all the tools and resources to take on China directly. Beyond international matters, the Commerce Department plays a significant role in economic expansion and prosperity within our nation's borders. My district is in the heart of Appalachia, in southeastern Kentucky. I've witnessed the distress caused by the downturn of the coal mining industry. I've seen firsthand the great things that can happen when we empower small and rural communities through job creation and economic opportunity. The Economic Development Administration and its assistance programs encourage innovation by providing competitive incentives for job creation in struggling communities. This year's budget also proposes investments in newer programs, such as the Recompete pilot program and the Regional Technology and Innovation Hub program. Both programs aim to create sustainable innovations to train the next generation workforce. It's no secret the American economy was and continues to be built on ingenuity, taking smart and calculated risks. The federal government, and particularly the Department of Commerce, should not stand in the way of hardworking Americans. I look forward to hearing about how this year's budget request prioritizes American innovation and competitiveness. So let me now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Cartwright.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to you, and good morning to our witness, and welcome, Honorable Gina Raimondo, Secretary of Commerce. Madam Secretary, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say the Department of Commerce right now is more central to our national interests than ever. It is responsible for a broader than ever set of priorities. Your department is at the forefront of critical efforts driving American competitiveness, American national security, American technological leadership. You are responsible for an awful lot. overseeing billions of dollars to help expand access to broadband, maintaining export controls that protect our national security, identifying weaknesses in our supply chains, providing accurate and reliable weather forecasting, bringing good jobs to distressed communities. The chairman just mentioned the Recompete program, and I'm also interested in that. Jump-starting our semiconductor manufacturing industry, conducting an accurate census, advancing the trade interests of American businesses, and leading the way on safety and development for critical emerging technologies like artificial intelligence. And that's just a sample of your highest profile work. I look forward to hearing today about the department's commitment to keep American manufacturing, our supply chains, and overall global competitiveness strong. The President's fiscal year 2025 budget request of $11.4 billion in discretionary funding for the Department of Commerce represents an increase of 5.9% for the department's important and diverse missions, all of which are critical for the success of American workers and businesses in the 21st century. The request focuses on many of the department's needs, and it was interesting to read the census request as the Bureau prepares for the 2030 census. Seems like just yesterday we were gearing up for the 2020 census. The department continues to implement key components of the Bipartisan CHIPS and Science Act and the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Programs under these acts will expand broadband access across the country and revitalize America's competitive edge in semiconductor research, development, and manufacturing. So I look forward to hearing further about these issues and others. And I thank you, Madam Secretary, for your ongoing work and for your presence and testimony today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
We will now recognize our witness, Secretary Raimondo, for an opening statement. Without objection, your written statement will be entered in the record. Welcome to the subcommittee, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning to all of you. Special thank you to Chair Rogers, Ranking Member Cartwright. Thank you for your leadership, and all the members of the subcommittee. Thank you for this opportunity this morning to discuss the President's budget. And I want to say thank you for your strong support of the department. In a bipartisan way, we have received excellent support from your committee, and I want to say thank you for that. As you have said, the Commerce Department is implementing major initiatives authorized by Congress through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS and Science Act. Thanks to you and these laws and the funding you've provided, every day at the Commerce Department, we're tackling our nation's most pressing economic and national security priorities. It's not an exaggeration to say that the Commerce Department is doing more now than we ever have before. The budget request, as you've said, is for $11.4 billion in discretionary funding and $4 billion in mandatory funding for fiscal 25. And I'm here to discuss the budget and, of course, ask you for your support for the budget. Permit me to highlight just a few of our key priorities. First, the budget positions America to prevent China and other countries from obtaining U.S. technologies, capital, and expertise for activities that threaten our national security. Specifically, it includes a $223 million increase for BIS to expand export control enforcement and $5 million for ITA to address risks from outbound investments into sensitive technologies in China. Second, the budget promotes America's technological leadership and responsible innovation in artificial intelligence. We all know AI is the defining technology of our generation. So we are asking for $30 million for the AI Safety Institute at NIST, and also money for NTIA to establish an AI and emerging technologies policy lab. With AI, we need to invest and go fast, and at the same time keep a lid on the risks. The budget supports resilient supply chains. It includes an increase of $12 million in ITA to support a supply chain resiliency office, and it includes $37 million for NIST's Manufacturing USA program and $175 million for NIST Manufacturing Extension Partnership. We cannot be a great country unless we manufacture in America and have resilient supply chains, and so that is what these investments are for. The budget provides resources to strengthen our relationship with our allies, to advance our shared values, and shape the strategic environment in which China operates. We have to outcompete China. That means we have to show up around the world. So the budget includes $379 million for ITA to expand U.S. exports and services to help U.S. businesses grow in foreign markets. The budget invests in good jobs and equitable growth, as the chairman referenced. It requests $4 billion in mandatory funding for tech hubs and $523 million in discretionary funding for EDA in order for EDA to advance its mission of tech hubs, job training with the Good Jobs Challenge, and foster geographic diversity in innovation. It also invests $80 million in the MBDA to continue our services for socially and economically disadvantaged businesses. The budget invests to address climate change. It includes $6.5 billion for NOAA, including $2 billion for the nation's weather and climate satellites, $1.4 billion for the National Weather Service, $212 million for climate research. Finally, the budget invests in our fundamental science infrastructure. The budget invests over $400 million in fundamental research infrastructure, science research at NIST and NOAA and NTIA. This includes critical investments in maintenance, renovations, and improvements at our NIST campuses. So in closing, I just want to echo what the chairman said and the ranking member said. Our work at the Commerce Department focuses on strengthening America's competitiveness, both at home and abroad, so that American workers, families, and businesses can participate and prosper in 21st century global economy. And most important, we protect our national security. So with that, I'm happy to answer any of your questions.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. We will now proceed under the 5-minute rule for questions. I will begin by recognizing myself. Madam Secretary, between each decennial census, the U.S. population grows and changes. Therefore, effective and efficient government requires high quality and objective sources of information. How does the Census Bureau determine what questions will be included in the decennial census?
Thank you for the question. And we are gearing up for 2030, which is closer than you might think. I'm so proud to say that we have unbelievably high-quality data scientists, statisticians, economists at the census, and they are constantly in the process of using the best data science and statistics techniques to figure out how do you ask these questions to get the best information. Fundamentally, the census should have nothing to do with politics. It should just be about getting the data so we have the best objective picture possible of all the people who are in America and every information that we can gather about them and their needs.
Illegal immigration is out of control. There is a crisis at our southern border, and just like you need to be an American citizen to vote, I think that you should be an American citizen to be counted in the census. Just like voting, census data has a direct impact on our representation. If a locality knows they can receive greater representation in Congress and greater resources from the federal government, doesn't the current policy encourage that locality to flout illegal immigration laws to inflate its own census numbers? Would the Secretary like to comment?
Yeah, and respectfully, sir, I do not agree with that. The Constitution is crystal clear. Our job is to count all persons without regard to their immigration status. And as I said before, I'm very proud of the professionals who work at the Census. And honestly, my job is not to inject my political views or the president's political views or anyone's political views into the way they do their job. Their job is to be nonpartisan, collect the best data possible, and count every person.
Given China's increasing dominance in various industries, including technology, I would hope the International Trade Administration is working towards a plan to prioritize national security concerns alongside efforts to promote U.S. exports and reduce the trade deficit with China. What measures is ITA taking to prevent the transfer of sensitive U.S. technology to China?
So thank you for the question. This is probably the thing I spend most of my time on, which is making sure we do everything we can to deny China our most sophisticated technology. So BIS, working with ITA, we try to have a robust program. I'm very proud to say that in my tenure, we've put more Chinese companies on the entity list than in under any other Commerce Secretary. Last year, we had more convictions of export control violations than ever before. And we're just constantly, I wake up every single day figuring out how we might tighten our controls to make sure that China cannot get access to our most sophisticated chips, AI, quantum, et cetera. The budget requests additional funding for BIS. It's been flat for 2 years, but licensing requests are going like this. The threat is going like this. The budget also requests money for ITA, so we can do outbound investment screening, make sure that U.S. money doesn't go to advance Chinese capability in these sensitive areas. So I'm out of time. I'll leave it at that, but I absolutely share the priority.
How will ITA ensure that U.S. businesses are not inadvertently supporting China's military ambitions or engaging in activities that could pose a threat to U.S. national security? What steps is ITA taking to strengthen its screening processes and ensure compliance with export controls?
So as I said, we are constantly looking. The thing here that we watch out for mostly is dual use, a technology that can be used in a commercial application, but also in the military. And so that's the hard work of what we do, trying to figure out what are commercially available technologies by U.S. companies that China doesn't have, but they want access to advance their military. And so it's a constant vigilance, like constantly interfacing with U.S. companies, constantly gathering data, and importantly, enforcing. You know, under my leadership, we have imposed the largest single civil penalty ever for a company, in this case Seagate, who went around our export controls. We've had more convictions last year than any year before. So it's a combination of changing the policy, working with companies, but also being really serious about enforcement.
Mr. Carline?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Secretary Raimondo, you finish your opening statement rightly pointing out that our top priority in the Commerce Department is national security, and I agree with that. So I want to follow up on some questions the chairman had about BIS. In an interconnected and rapidly modernizing world, our biggest challenges in national security are often problems of economics and technology, two areas where the Department of Commerce leads. Now, you've been using the three letters BIS a lot, and a lot of people aren't familiar with that. BIS stands for the Bureau of Industry and Security, and I think we ought to say that whole title for people that don't know what that is. The Bureau of Industry and Security, this year, your request includes a $32 million increase and a request for 26 new positions. I'd like you to discuss how this Bureau of Industry and Security request helps address national security challenges, especially the threat posed by China's military modernization.
Thank you, sir. You know, Bureau of Industry and Security wasn't very well known until the last handful of years. And the reason is because what the chairman said, the threat from China. When you think national security, you might think guns, tanks, missiles, fighter jets. I think semiconductors, quantum, AI model weights, et cetera. And so what we are doing at the Commerce Department is constantly studying these dual-use technologies to figure out what do we have, where is China, and make certain that China cannot access our technology for their military. So for example, in the budget request, there is some number, $8 million for export control officers. Like, if we're gonna go after the bad guys, we need to be on the ground collecting data to find them when they do an end run around our export controls. We're asking for $3.5 million for IT systems.
That's right.
Right? Like, we need to know where they are at all times. And by the way, it's not just China. It's not just China. We find Chinese and Iranian equipment in drones in Russia. So in any event, Bureau of Industry and Security is at the leading edge of protecting this country's national security. The budget's been flat, the threat is quadrupling, and I'm respectfully requesting additional monies.
Your request is noted. Madam Secretary, as the scope and complexity of the agency's work continues to expand, do you worry about being able to hire and retain staff with the necessary technical expertise, and what is being done to address this challenge?
It's such a great question. I worry about it constantly. If we're going to compete, the U.S. government needs the top tech talent that there is. And it's why, for example, I'm requesting money for artificial intelligence, the Artificial Intelligence Safety Institute. If we are going to know what's going on at the cutting edge of AI, I need the best scientists there are. So yes, I worry about it. That being said, I'm very proud of our track record. We just recruited somebody from OpenAI to come and work for us. He was a leading scientist there. The CHIPS team is run by some of the best semiconductor professionals in the industry. So it's a daily challenge. It's why we're requesting funding, but I will say I've been very impressed with the quality of people we have been able to get.
Well, speaking of AI, what specific investments are you proposing?
So in AI, we are asking for funds for the AI Safety Institute, which is to create standards for AI. You know, everybody, including myself, is worried about synthetic content. So we want companies to watermark what's AI generated. Well, what's adequate watermarking? What's adequate red teaming? So we're going to build a team, the AI Safety Institute, to develop standards so that Americans can know, be safe. We're also investing in scientists, and we're investing in policy people at NTIA to help us develop policies for AI. I'll just say, In this respect, I'm very much looking forward to working with the Congress. We're doing what we can do, but at the end of the day, Congress needs to legislate as it relates to AI, and I look forward to supporting that effort.
And last question, the AI Safety Institute, that will be part of NIST, am I correct in that?
Yes, exactly, yes.
National Institutes for
Science
Standards
and
Technology.
Technology. Yes. Where we have 2 Nobel Prize-winning scientists. People don't understand how top-notch the scientists are at NIST.
Thank you. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gonzalez?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary. Iran hates the United States and our allies, like Israel and Ukraine, and Iran is eating America's lunch. My question is, the Department of Commerce plays a key role in enforcing U.S. sanctions on Iran. I'm concerned that reports that Iranian drones used in Ukraine were determined to have been built with numerous components from American firms. Tehran and its proxies throughout the Middle East are using drones with American-made technology to attack American personnel and our allies. What is the Commerce Department doing to address this illicit exports to Iran?
Yeah. Listen, I share your concern, and if you have any ideas of what more we could be doing, I'd like to hear them. I really would. When the war broke out, we immediately put export controls in place against Russia with 39 other countries, and they were effective. They are effective. Part of the reason we know they're effective is Russia couldn't get our stuff, so they went to Iran and China, and now we see what you're seeing. So we continue to tighten, like we're constantly adding entities to our list. With respect to Iran, we've put together a task force with the DOJ and DHS to do everything we can to enforce our, export controls. I'll be the first to admit that there's more work to be done. What I would tell you is we're just throwing every tool we have, we're throwing it at the problem, tightening the actual policy controls. Some of the money I'm asking for is for export control agents, right? We have to be able to enforce these rules and just stay vigilant on it every single day.
I have some ideas. I'd love to be able to visit
yeah.
with you and maybe walk through making some of this come to fruition. Maybe we can follow up with that.
Absolutely.
Great. My next question is, I continue to hear concerns from rural communities. My district is larger than the state of Pennsylvania, and a large part of it is in rural communities. And folks in South and West Texas talk about their potential ability to, the communication providers in these areas, talk about their potential ability to participate in the agency's BEAD initiative, the lack of it due to the large size of the areas, and that some states will require applicants to serve, as well as the challenges delivering services at a very low mandated rate to certain consumers. What has the agency done about these concerns? Basically, large areas that you're trying to come, very different from an urban area.
Once again, this is something, you guys are hitting all the topics that keep me up at night. My job in implementing this $42 billion is to make sure every American has access. Everyone. We've never had a task like this before, including rural. We are massively focused on rural. That's what the subsidy's for. So we're working very closely with your governor and with the governor's team, using our maps to figure out who's not covered and providing subsidies to companies so that they, in fact, cover everyone, including in rural areas. What I can tell you, I do feel confident, based on everything I know, that we will get every community, even the most rural. We're going to have to be agnostic. It may be fiber. We have fiber preference, but it may not be. That may not be affordable. And we're going to make sure that everybody has access that's affordable at the end of our implementation. The way it works is every state has to submit a plan.
Sure.
Texas is different than Pennsylvania, different than Kentucky. And before we're giving any money to your state, we have to be satisfied that everybody will have access.
Rural broadband is a very serious concern of mine, because I feel as if there's a greater divide happening in this country, and it has nothing to do with the color of your skin or how much money you have in your bank account. It has everything to do with where you live, and that is not fair to many people. Now, it is a difficult problem set. It's not an easy wave the wand, throw some money at it, and all of a sudden it goes away. But I'd be very interested in how do we incorporate technology maybe into speeding up this process. There's a just a lot of options there. My last question is, I want to ask about, we talked about NIST earlier. I want to ask you about the delays at NIST for certifications through the agency's Cryptographic Validation Program, CMVP. NIST is sitting on an enormous backlog, some going as far back as 2021, to certain components that go into civilian and Department of Defense systems for data security and encryption. What is your plan to address this backlog?
So let me get you a more detailed answer, because, you know, as a former governor, backlogs drive me crazy. I got to get you the specifics, but I promise you I'll get back to you.
Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate the time. And Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Laurel is recognized, the ranking member of the full committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And at the outset, if I might ask unanimous consent to put my opening statement in the record. Thank you. And I want to welcome Secretary Raimondo. And I do want to say just a moment before I get to questions that I'm so delighted to have you here today. When the Biden administration took over 3 years ago, this nation really was in the throes of an economic crisis and a public health catastrophe. Your leadership, and with the help of this committee, you have improved our supply chains, you've invested in our communities, you increased manufacturing, helped small businesses grow, and through the appropriations process and legislative efforts like CHIPS, the CHIPS and Science Act, infrastructure, really have been an infrastructure that allows us to be able to do what you said at the outset, is to be competitive and to make America competitive. Let me just, I think you know what question I'm going to start with first. My hope is that we'll have a second round, but that is outbound investment. We've talked about this many times. I think the review mechanism is critically important to the nation's security. And American investments are not advancing the military and, as we just pointed out, as you pointed out, technological capabilities of our adversaries. When we spoke at the hearing last year, you discussed the importance of targeting this policy to investments that directly impact our national security. The administration since then has issued an executive order, create an outbound investment program, prohibit certain U.S. investments in countries of concern involving sensitive technologies and products. It will also require notification for investments involving lower risk products. While I understand Treasury is leading the effort, I understand that the International Trade Administration, ITA, will provide key support through analysis and industry-specific technical expertise. This will be critical to understanding the security risks that are associated with rapidly advancing cutting-edge technologies. The budget requests an increase of 5 million and 12 positions within ITA to create this new office, hire experts with the needed technical expertise. As Treasury continues to work on regulations, can you describe to what extent ITA has already started supporting implementation of the Outbound Investment Executive Order in this year, in 2024?
Yes, thank
Do
you.
you have staff dedicated to this work?
Yes, we do. So first of all, thank you for your persistent focus on this issue. It's incredibly important. It relates to what we were talking about. Technology is one thing, but we can't let them have our money and know-how. We have decided to focus on semiconductors and quantum and AI to make sure that U.S. money isn't funding those initiatives in China. Like you said, Treasury's in the lead. As I understand it, by the end of this year, by the end of this calendar year, the rule will be done, and so we can really start to implement it. What we're doing now in the meantime is building a team, and we've asked for $5 million to continue, to study the industry. So Treasury is obviously in charge of the finances and which funds and how to do the rule, but we are helping them to figure out which pieces of AI should we be most worried about? Which kinds of companies should we be most worried about? When we talk about quantum, what does that actually mean? So we're providing like the commercial, industrial, technological know-how to match up against Treasury's financial know-how. And we're already hard at work doing that.
Let me just, beyond what's included in the budget, Is there anything else that you can share with us about your resource needs? How ITA will ramp up outbound investment support activities? And given the type of technical expertise required, do you expect that hiring will be a challenge? So what are the spaces for you where we might be able to help with?
I think, I appreciate that. It's a few spaces. One is just data. You know, the kinds of investments we're talking about they're not in public stock market companies. You know, it's private money. It's hard to track, candidly. So any data that we can get access to track these sorts of private investments by us and our allies is very important. So some of that is like buying data sets, buying IT systems. And then the other thing is people. So we need to attract, like we were talking about before, like AI specialists, quantum specialists, not so much scientists, but commercially minded people. You know, like former venture capitalists, for example, which is hard. It is hard. But we've done it in the CHIPS program. We have, you know, former investors and such. I think we can do it in ITA, but that's what we're trying to do, and that's the challenge.
There's a final point. How will ITA anticipate and identify technologies and products that may be needed to add to those covered by the program now? You know, you and I have had the conversation in the past about critical minerals, batteries, et cetera, so forth. But what will be the process with ITA of looking at what we should add to this portfolio?
So one of the other budget requests, and I can't remember the precise number, but we're also asking for additional money for our supply chain management office. I think it's about $12 million that we're asking for in ITA. I will tell you, all members of the committee, when I started as secretary, we were using Excel spreadsheets and getting on the phone with companies to do supply chain tracking. And now we're building a team. We built a team. I'd be happy to model the product we've built for anybody here. It's a bespoke IT system where we can track and monitor our most critical supply chain vulnerabilities. We need to keep building that. We need to be much more proactive instead of proactive, predicting where are we going to have a supply chain problem? Where is China poised to take advantage of us? So that's the direction we're moving into instead of just being reactive, we're out of baby formula on the shelves, react.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for the additional time. Much appreciated.
Mr. Clyde?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. The Bureau of Industry and Security is the Commerce Department bureau that enforces export controls, correct?
Yes.
All right. According to the guiding principles found on its website, the Bureau of Industry and Security should ensure that the regulations it promulgates does not, and I quote, impose unreasonable restrictions on legitimate international commercial activity, end quote. The Bureau's guiding principles also state that they should avoid regulatory actions that, and I quote, compromise the international competitiveness of the U.S. industry. Now, you're asking for a budget increase for the Bureau of Industry and Security, $32.4 million, and also the International Trade Administration, whose responsibility it is to strengthen international competitiveness of U.S. industry, promoting trade and investment. You're asking for $34.5 million for them as well, both increases totaling over $60 million. And yet, the Bureau of Industry and Security finalized its interim final rule on April 30th of this year that permanently extends the current pause on firearm export licenses, violating both the previously outlined Bureau guidelines by severely restricting American firearm, ammunition, and other component manufacturers from acquiring the necessary licenses to export their products for sale. Under this interim final rule, the duration of firearm export licenses will be reduced from 4 years to 1, with approvals now occurring on a case-by-case basis. Following implementation of this rule, approximately 2,000 active firearm export licenses that were previously approved will be automatically revoked, compelling the affected companies to submit new applications for export licenses. So much for the Paperwork Reduction Act. In fact, the National Shooting Sports Foundation estimates that this could have an adverse economic impact of greater than $250 million for the United States firearms industry, severely hurting the countless firearms industry manufacturers, suppliers, and jobs that are supported across the country. Chairman, I request unanimous consent to submit to the record this firearm and ammunition industry economic impact report by the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Thank you. You know, this rule will cause massive confusion in the market. It will terminate current business. It will damage the goodwill of the brands of firearm manufacturers, and it eliminates future business. So, Madam Secretary, $250 million is a huge amount. Would you consider that an adverse economic impact? And would you consider that as compromising the competitiveness of the U.S. industry abroad?
Thank you for the question. I will say this. National security has to come before commerce. It's one of the hardest parts of my job. I tell semiconductor companies that they can't sell their chips to China. It denies them revenue. But first and foremost, it's national security. I want to say I hear you, and I appreciate your concerns, but the reality is this is a very narrowly targeted change to tighten up our license requirements. It's based upon good data we have around diversion. Guns go one place but wind up in the hands of criminals or drug traffickers or terrorists. And we're denying or making it very hard to sell guns to 36 countries that have unrest, huge drug cartels. It is not in America's national security interests to export guns that wind up in the hands of criminals that could destabilize those countries or, quite frankly, our own country. I will tell you, every one of those people that had their license revoked can reapply, but it's going to be under stricter scrutiny in light of the evidence we have around diversion.
Well, ma'am, I mean, these are vetted countries. You know, obviously, these licenses were approved in the past, okay? I mean, this is going to cost the United States firearms industry a tremendous amount of money. So, was there any communication with the White House regarding this rule?
Probably, but, you know, no decisions we make have any, if you're insinuating was there any political element to this, absolutely not. We have data from the GAO and other places that say, you know, when law enforcement agencies confiscate guns in these 36 countries in connection with crimes, drug crimes, cartels, terrorists, they're guns that have been diverted. They were sold to a, you know, legitimate commercial user and diverted. And that's against American national security, and that's why we took these steps. By the way, as proof that these are narrowly targeted, as everything we do in BIS, the restrictions will affect less than 10% of all gun exports. So I don't agree with you that I admit it is some commerce, but I think national security comes first, and I don't agree that it's large swaths of commerce. These are narrowly tailored to meet the national security mission.
Ma'am, a $250 million economic impact is not narrowly tailored. I certainly cannot possibly support this increase in funding when BIS comes out with this particular type of a rule, and I yield back.
Mr. Morelli?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member Cartwright for holding this important hearing. And Madam Secretary, thank you for joining us today and for your service and that of your staff. We interact often with them, and the whole operation has been incredibly professional and very helpful. I want to talk briefly about regional tech hubs and appreciate, again, your leadership in the space, which has been extraordinary. But if you could just help articulate, you know, my hope is that we will find ways to have robust, consistent, predictable funding for the Regional Tech Hub program over the next, you know, decade. It seems to me that's important not only to aid those areas we're going to invest in, but also to attract private capital, something obviously you know a great deal about. I wonder if you could just talk about from the perspective of both achieving the mission and attracting private capital to many of these communities, why that robust, consistent funding is important, predictability.
Thank you, Congressman. I have to say, I can't believe I've gone this far in a hearing without someone asking about tech hubs. And here's why. In my entire time in government, I've never seen a more popular program on a bipartisan basis in rural communities, and, it's unbelievable to me. It's a great program that you created and authorized. We have 400 applications worth of asking for about $2 billion. We will have the money to make, a half a dozen tech hub investments of size, $30–40 million. So I wish we could, we've identified, of the 400, we identified 31 that we thought were really the best. Every single one of those is worthy of funding, but due to the funding constraints in EDA, we'll, like you say, we'll do like 6 to 10-ish investments. This is necessary for our national security. I mean, I can do everything possible in the world with Bureau of Industry and Security to deny China. The way we will beat China is by out-innovating China. And that means tapping into the technology, resources, and talent in every nook and cranny of America, including, by the way, Chairman Rogers, in coal country and in rural country. I mean, Kentucky has a great tech hub proposal. I don't have them all memorized, but in all of your districts, your states have put in great tech hub programs. Silicon Valley, Boston, New York City don't have a monopoly on great talent, great ideas, and great technology. And the whole point of tech hubs is to get outside of those communities and consistently fund innovation in America to make us stronger, to outcompete the world. So the budget asks for additional funding for that. I respectfully request that additional funding. It'll make America stronger in every way possible.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm not sure if I get points for being the first person to ask, but if you want to add points to my ledger, that'd be great. I wanted to turn quickly to AI. We've talked about it a fair amount. I actually have introduced legislation which would prohibit the disclosure of non-consensual AI deepfake in pornography, which, as it turns out, and this is really troubling, 96% of deepfakes online are pornographic or intimate in nature. But what I really appreciate about the AI Safety Institute and NIST is I believe part of this is to look at content authenticity detection, which is really important, so people can be certain or have some degree of confidence that what they're looking at actually is real and hasn't been adapted or faked in some way. Could you just talk a little bit about what you anticipate or what you envision NIST doing to be able to identify that?
Yeah, thank you for your legislation. It is really scary and unbelievable to see some of these deep fakes. I'm sure you guys have seen them. So what we're going to do in the budget request for NIST is a couple things. One, develop the science to be able to identify what is authentic versus what is AI generated. But two, I think we need to get to a place where and we'll need Congress's help to do this, where we require companies to identify, is this AI-generated content or is it real content? And they'll do that by some process of watermarking. And what we're going to have to do at NIST is figure out what's adequate watermarking.
Yeah.
So that it's all about trust. AI is exciting. We can cure cancer faster, create medicine faster, but people have to trust it. And so we're going to develop standards around synthetic content and watermarking so that an individual, when they see it, will know, is it fake or is it real? And that if it's watermarked, fake or real, they can trust in that watermark.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, and I know my time is up, but I'd also say we need to think about the data sets used to train AI models, and I don't think there's enough conversation around that, and I'd love to interact with your staff and just give additional thoughts to that. But, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Elsie?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here today. I'd like to first give you a compliment on Bureau of Industry and Security restricting sale of chips from Intel and Qualcomm to Huawei in response to a letter from Senator Rubio and Representative Stefanik. The turnaround on that was fantastic, as well as using NTIA for $420 million in grants to offset what Huawei has done. They are a real threat and have been for 20 years, and I think we're realizing that. So I wanted to start with just a compliment. I want to transition to Taiwan and the South China Sea. Can you describe for me approximately how much of the world's commerce goes through the South China Sea?
Massive amounts. Just 10 seconds on your prior thing. Technically, I'm not allowed to talk about any particular license revocations. However, back to our conversation, Huawei's a threat. AI is our focus. As we get more data around our threats, we make changes to tighten the screws, including revoking licenses that had been previously given. So without commenting on those two companies specifically, I guess I want to reassure you we're constantly on it, tightening screws where we need to, including revoking licenses. I don't have a number for you, but I don't know, massive.
It's about a third. It's about a third of the world's
third, yeah,
commerce.
massive amounts of commerce.
And that is right in the vicinity of Taiwan. So could you very briefly describe for me what happens if China invades Taiwan and locks down the South China Sea to American commerce and takes over TSMC?
It would be absolutely devastating.
How devastating?
Well, right now, I'm not commenting on whether that's going to happen, how it's going to happen, if it's going to happen. But what I can tell you is right now, the United States buys 92% of its leading-edge chips from TSMC in Taiwan.
And that's because they're 2 generations ahead of anything that we can build here in the United States, correct?
No. They are vastly ahead of anything we're doing in the United
Yes.
States. However, the announcements TSMC just made in Arizona will be to build 2 nanometer and 3 nanometer, which is their most sophisticated stuff.
Got it. But until then, they're a strategic asset in Taiwan, which makes it essential for us to defend the South China Sea and Taiwan, not just one place. Would you agree?
I would agree, yes.
Okay. So moving on from that, on the chips issue, we're finding that chips from North Korean drones being used by Russia to attack Ukraine have American chips in in them. So what is BIS doing to stop that flow? It appears that they can use what we think are harmless commercial-grade chips to use for lethal purposes around the world at a time that looks very much like 1940. Can we be doing more, or are you doing everything you can and some just slip through? How does that work?
Okay, a few things. One, the fact that they have to use chips from breast pumps and refrigerators and such, which is what they're doing, is because our initial controls worked, right? Like, we're denying the sophisticated stuff, which has slowed them down hugely. And so they're going to do what you're doing, which is getting quote-unquote commodity chips and jerry-rigging their equipment. It's less high, and they're having to rely on Iran and China to do this. So that's not good news, but it is what it is. So we are doing everything we know how to do as fast as we can with the resources that we have. For example, when we find out that a Chinese company is going around our export controls to Russia, we put that company on the entity list. When we find out, I was telling you someone before, we've created a task force with DHS and the DOJ to help us identify and, prosecute countries or companies that go around our export controls. So, listen, if you have ideas of more you think we could do, I want to hear them. I think we're doing everything we can with the resources we have, but it's massively frustrating and angering when you see Russia do what they do and work with, folks like China to get around our export controls.
I know you're doing the best you can do, and especially in the national security realm, so I appreciate it. Thank you for your fascinating testimony, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Rappaport?
Thank you. First thing, I think you're doing a great job. Keep doing it. You have different areas of that you're involved in, and you're coming together as a team for America, and it makes a difference. First thing, I also want to thank you for designating Baltimore as a tech hub. We're very excited to go after the funds, which total $10 billion over the next 5 years. Mohan Santha, who's President and CEO of University of Maryland Medical System, as well as chair of the Greater Baltimore Committee's Board of Directors, said the application reflected the collective belief in the potential of predictive health technologies to revolutionize our industries and elevate entire community. Now, I've spent close to 21 years in Congress advocating for national security. When I was in leadership on the Intelligence Committee, the chairman and I worked to keep Huawei equipment out of the United States systems. We knew that Huawei was a backdoor threat that could cripple the U.S. if we were ever to put them in an adversarial situation, and it almost happened when the governor of Texas brought them into the United States. For acting for a long time, we knew China stole from us. They were taking everything from fertilizer recipes to advanced technology. The threats that come from the stealing of U.S. technology is great. Look at China's space program, made massive advances by stealing from us. In the technological races of today, like space exploration, quantum computers, artificial intelligence, and computer chips, we have to do everything we can to protect these technologies. We have to protect them from our adversaries, and the Department of Commerce is on the front line of that. Now, in your 60 Minutes interview, a lot of the issues you talked about were alarming and spot on. In our efforts to address competition and threats from China government, we need to make sure the Department of Commerce has the tools, resources like our other frontline defender in the Department of Defense. First, we can always give you money and manpower, but what technology tools do you need to work smarter, like supply chain, mapping, et cetera? Second, how is the Commerce working with the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, to address the law enforcement issues? And secondly, what are we talking about here is balance between enforcement and helping the economy. What we have here is a Boeing paradox. Boeing has to sell planes to China, but what happens if we're in a situation that's more aggressive with China? Can you talk about how you balance our national security with economic need?
Okay.
Get all that?
I get you down, do my best. First of all, I'm familiar with your tech hub. Doesn't mean it'll get funded, but I'm familiar with it. I think it's excellent.
It makes me a little excited you just said that, but go ahead.
And the governor has called me numerous times.
I know.
So I got it, the memo. Secondly, we do need people. Some of it is just human beings to do enforcement, right? With the conversation we just had, we're trying to cover the world here. So yes, we work with the FBI. Yes, we work with the intelligence community. Yeah, we've putting we have several new efforts with the DOJ. The fellow Matt Axelrod, who runs enforcement, comes from the DOJ. But we do need more manpower, to your point. We also need more IT systems. We need more data sets. The amount of information available, and also we need to use AI. So we need to buy products that are AI enabled that allow us to scour every data set all over the world and every piece of data, public and private, to tell us what's really going on. So that is what we need. Here's the one thing I would say to you. You mentioned Boeing. We aren't trying to cut off all trade with China. We're not trying to cut off all tech trade with China, right? We're going to continue to sell them, and that's good for America's economy. Semiconductor chips, all kinds of technology. And the reason is because, they make a lot. They make a lot themselves. They can buy a lot from the rest of the world. We just need to focus on these choke point technologies, things that we have that they can't otherwise get access to, not commodity type goods. And it makes it it's more doable. if you can identify what are the choke points and focus on that and work with our allies, like work with the Japanese and the Dutch, for example, in semiconductors, to fully, completely deny China, to slow them down, to slow their military down. And I think that's important. We need to focus on we're after their military capability. I will tell you, we've controlled almost 700 types of dual-use items to Russia, to the questions before, and we are constantly adding, I think we've added almost 100 Chinese entities to the entity list because they are trying to aid and abet Russia going around our export controls. So this really is hand-to-hand combat every day. We've got to get up and go at it every day, and the resources I'm asking for will help us to do a better job.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Klein?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here.
Morning.
Good morning. I want to talk to you about BIDOL, which generally allows federal contractors to take ownership of patents on inventions created with federal funding. As you know, the federal government has the power to march in and grant compulsory licenses to third parties in some circumstances. On December 8th of last year, NIST issued a draft framework to provide guidance to federal agencies on what to assess when considering whether to exercise march-in authority, and explicitly included price as a factor for the first time since the act was passed in 1980 with strong bipartisan support. The authors of BIDOL have stated that the law makes no reference to a reasonable price that should be dictated by the government, and that this omission was intentional. Aren't you concerned that the administration's proposal to consider price as a factor for exercising march-in rights will send us back to a time when government-funded research just sat on the shelf, not benefiting anyone?
Yeah, so let me say this. We stand strongly on the side of IP protection, and the document to which you're referring is non-binding. It is a interagency memo for guidance, which is just that. All of this is a balancing test. The president has rightly focused extremely on bringing down the cost of pharmaceuticals and bringing down the cost of medicine and drugs successfully. But I don't want to give you any impression. We stand strongly on the side of IP protection.
Thank you. Let me stay with IP. Over the past decade, standards essential patents, SEPs, have become a focal point of controversy. The European courts, notably in Germany, frequently issue injunctions against U.S. companies for the use of common industry standards, such as Wi-Fi, which do not align with the practices in the United States. These injunctions don't serve to address competitive harms, but instead to compel companies to agree to excessively high royalty fees. The recent establishment of the Unified Patent Court in Europe poses an increased risk, as its injunctions will have broader implications across multiple countries in Europe. Given the significant impact of these legal standards on U.S. businesses, can you explain the administration's stance on the proposed EU regulation concerning standards essential patents and how it plans to stand up for U.S. companies in the face of challenges posed by entities like Huawei and others who engage in aggressive patent monetization?
Yeah. What I can tell you is we just had Kathy Vidal, who runs the patent office in China, focused on many of these issues, and she was recently in Europe. I have to get back to you with a proper answer, but I will do it, and maybe you and Kathy and I could have a phone call and go into the details.
That'd be great. As the President's principal advisor on spectrum issues, NTIA plays a critical role in ensuring the technologies of the future continue to advance. The U.S. telecommunications industry is developing and deploying 5G technologies, but is at risk of falling behind our adversaries like China due to a gridlock on spectrum. Do you agree that the United States must restore the FCC's auction authority, and when it does so, identify a pipeline of spectrum that can support commercial innovation and U.S. leadership?
I do. Here's what I think. I think certainly we need to restore their auction authority. I think this is a balance, which is to say we support a NTIA studying the spectrum, seeing what could be made available, and looking at maybe spectrum sharing. DoD needs what it needs to do its mission, and a lot of this spectrum is really important. But I strongly support figuring out how we can find some spectrum to advance commercial innovation without ever impairing their mission, and I think it's possible. By the way, here's what I also think. we can't think of national security so narrowly. That's what I said this before. Like, national security isn't just tanks, missiles, satellites, et cetera. It's also our ability to outcompete Huawei, our ability to outcompete China. And so if you look at the amount of mid-band spectrum available, say, in China versus here for commercial sector, we got a lot of catching up to do. So I think it's complicated, and I don't want my comments to be interpreted as saying, go take from the DOD whatever we need. But I do think it's a discussion we have to have, and we absolutely need their auction authority reauthorized.
Thank you. One more. NTIA has approved only 4 states' BEAD plan so far. You've testified repeatedly acknowledging that the underlying statute prohibits NTIA from regulating broadband rates, and you're not rate regulating, not price setting. But I'm hearing that approval of the plan by my state, Virginia, has been held up because it declined to just do just that, set prices at NTIA's request. It's been nearly 5 months since NTIA approved Louisiana's plan, which was submitted at the same time as Virginia's, and Virginia has still not been approved. There are no remaining outstanding issues, as I understand, with Virginia's plan, under the rightful acknowledgement that neither NTIA nor the state have the authority to set prices as NTIA is requesting. So can you commit to approving a state plan that complies with the law's prohibition on rate regulation, and specifically approving Virginia's plan as submitted to NTIA?
I cannot commit to the last one. I'll commit to the first one.
Okay.
Let me say this. These are super complicated. There'll be more next week and more the following week. We're getting our flywheel going. I will look in on Virginia when I go back this afternoon. What I can promise you is we aren't rate regulating. We are not telling any state, including yours, if you don't provide it at X dollars, we're not going to, give you the money. But the statute requires us to have low-cost options. So we are obviously pushing states to make sure they're providing low-cost options. I will tell everyone here that, by the end of this year, by the fall, I'm pushing the team to have all these plans approved. I meet with them every week to say, where are you and how to go faster? And, I'll look in on your plan.
Thank you. Yield back.
Ms. Bing?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Secretary Raimondo, for your tremendous work and for being here today. I wanted to go back to the citizenship question that was mentioned earlier. As you know well, and you alluded to, the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution states that representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state. I know that you and the public servants who lead the Census Bureau take this mandate from the Constitution seriously. Is there any agency in the federal government that keeps track of non-citizens?
You have stumped me, Congresswoman.
I assume,
I think,
like the U.S.
yeah, I mean, not, not certainly in my remit, no.
And why is the practice of counting every person living in each state needed to produce an accurate and full census?
Because as you well know, and every governor knows, and I know this from being governor, the census is just about getting information, right? So how much housing is required in a particular state? How much, how many people are going to be in the schools? And that's why I bristle at any, political interference, frankly, from either side as it relates to the census. It's like, just the facts, ma'am. So we have experts collect, as you say, follow the Constitution, every person. Undercounting is a problem because it's an inaccurate picture of what's going on in every state and what kind of public safety services are needed, what kind of educational services are needed. If people are afraid because of their immigration status to talk to the census counter, we're not going to get an accurate number, and that inaccuracy prevents us from doing the best job we can at running government at the state level and the federal level.
And if we were to violate what the Constitution has charged the Census Bureau to do, would that potentially affect the amount of federal funding that a state could receive?
Absolutely, yes.
Thank you. I wanted to also thank you for your department's recent action on regulating licenses for firearms experts. I know that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are extremely concerned, as we are, about the threats posed by transnational criminal networks and adversarial governments. So I must say that I'm confused by their opposition to their proposed change. I want to ask if this rule will keep American guns out of the hands of drug traffickers.
We hope it will. That's certainly its intention, and that's how we're going to enforce it. I'll say I was recently in Costa Rica, a region of great instability, and the president there was, they are a democracy. They're trying to develop their economy, and that's good for the United States to have an ally with a thriving democracy in that region. Contrast that with, say, Ecuador. So we're doing this, again, not for political reasons, but for our own foreign policy. It's not in our interest for drug traffickers, terrorists, murderers, people interested in fomenting instability and destroying democracy to have guns.
And will this rule decrease the number of American guns in the hands of foreign terrorists and transnational criminal organizations?
Yes, we believe that it will.
And will this rule make our world and our country safer?
Yes, we believe it will.
And finally, how will the funding that the Department of Commerce has requested for fiscal year 2025 enable the Bureau of Industry and Security to continue its work of protecting our national security, especially as it relates to gun violence?
We are asking for additional funds for more analysts, more technologists, more data sets, more technology, and more enforcement agents. So, we can have the best policy in the world, but if we don't have enough people to enforce it, we're not going to be effective.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the census conversation, I agree everyone should be counted for the purposes of infrastructure and public safety, but not for the purposes of representation, either at the state level assemblies or in the House of Representatives, which is currently, it does wag the dog in terms of representation, and so that's, I think, the point of what we're trying to do. Madam Secretary, you and I share the aspirations of reciprocal trade agreements with China. I agree we can't cut off all trade with China, but imparting on them the same terms and conditions of contracts and share ratios, access to intellectual property that they put on us when we do business in their country, I think is important when they do business in our country. So we'd love to keep those conversations going offline if we can and figure out how we can help you in that regards. That's a broader conversation. The former program director and me can't help but look at CHIPS Act as a very massive program that should have program management reviews on a regular basis. This is probably one of the forums where we get to do that. So I'm going to ask you some questions. There's some indexes, SPI and CPI, Schedule Performance Index, Cost Performance Index. The original budget of CHIPS was roughly $280 billion, and now we're approaching about the 2-year anniversary of the passage of CHIPS. We didn't really have an objective end state goal in terms of dates, but we all kind of understand that 2027 is an important kind of calendar line in the sand relative to the highest risk potential of China invading Taiwan. So with those numbers and that paradigm, how are we doing from a program management perspective? Are you on schedule? Are you on cost? And before you answer, I want to overlay the feedback that I'm getting from folks in Silicon Valley, also smaller mom and pop shops in Southern California and throughout the country. They don't feel like we're going fast enough. They feel like they are being overregulated. They feel like we are overlying other requirements and specs that have nothing to do with the technology, that have nothing to do with the performance or maybe even the construction of facilities. There are actual DEI metrics being imparted on these contracts and tracked as conditions of awards. NEPA issues and environmental qual issues that continue to just get worse and deeper. There are some companies that are having to retroactively go back and show compliance to Davis-Bacon labor policies that they would not have otherwise had to have done with construction that would not have been done by outside union labor organizations. You're pushing a lot of smaller companies away with these regulatory requirements from participating. This is exactly what we were afraid of happening. And you and I appreciate all the time you spent in the SCIF with me explaining the nexus to the DoD and making sure that we're satisfying those requirements. I'd like to take that conversation offline and follow up, but talk about the health of the program in terms of metrics. Are we on schedule? Are we on cost? How do we go faster? These barriers to speed are real. And how can the contracting officers value speed as much as they value other things, maybe such as DEI or some of these labor policy requirements being enforced? If you can comment on that.
Yeah, great, thank you. First, real quick on reciprocal trade, one of the things that we did recently was through BIS was around connected vehicles. You know, you can't drive your Tesla to the airport in Beijing. You can't. You can't drive an American-made connected vehicle around certain areas in China. So what's fair is fair. So what we're saying is we are concerned about Chinese connected vehicles on the roads in the United States, not for, you know, tariff and such, but economic disparities, but data. Think of all the data.
Yeah, like electric buses being driven around Plant 42 that are made by a Chinese company would be a problem, which is what we have in our district right now.
Collecting data.
Collecting data, yep.
On the driver, what they say, where they go, their driving patterns. So just a second to let you know, I am trying to move out on some of these reciprocity ideas that we've been discussing to protect Americans.
Great, thank you.
Look, on chips, here's what I'll say, and I'll try and do it in 30 seconds. I think we are on path. That's the bottom line. You say we're approaching the 2-year anniversary. I have 6 months before the 2-year anniversary, so that's a lot of wood to
I'll
chop
give you a
between
curve on
now
that
and then.
Yes.
We have put out, I started with nothing. I now have 200 people, amazingly talented people, would welcome you to come meet them anytime. We have put out, I think, $29 billion. We've been on a roll recently, okay? I know people were frustrated until the beginning of this year. In the last 3 months, we have done, I think, 7 or 8 big deals, putting out nearly $30 billion, all to the leading edge providers. To the conversation we had earlier, TSMC has committed to build 3 fabs, including 2 nanometer chip fabs, in the United States. Samsung is included, leading edge, plus research and development, plus packaging. Micron will be at scale. So I think, look, I know I have to go fast, but it's much more important that I get it right. The metric I look at is, will we be making 20% of the world's leading edge chips in the United States by 2030? And I say yes, I think we can. With respect to the smaller companies, it's a challenge, but we're trying. We have just put out an application for smaller companies to apply, so I can get you that information, get the word out to your constituents. It's harder for little companies to interact with government, so we have a specific application. We're going to do another one, a $50 million research and development that only small companies can apply to. With respect to NEPA, look, it's tough. I have a whole team that is helping companies work through the NEPA issues. We are getting there, but it's a challenge. Davis-Bacon's in the law. Davis-Bacon is in the statute. We will comply. We are complying. And I don't think, look, every condition that we're putting in there, some related to workforce, some related to childcare, some related to DEI, I can honestly tell you, Congressman, it's designed to make sure these projects are successful. They need to find workers. If you say to me, what's the biggest risk? It's lack of workers. So we're pushing these companies to broaden the way they think about workforce, the way they train workforce, so they can have the talent they need on the timeline that they need it. So this is a big discussion, and I'd be very happy to follow up with you.
Thank you. Fair enough. Thank you. I yield it back.
That concludes the first round of questions for the witness. There is a request for additional questions, so we'll do a second round. But I ask unanimous consent of all members that we limit remarks to 3 minutes to allow the witness to meet an obligation at noon that she has. So, Madam Secretary, we will get you out of here
I appreciate that.
in due course of time. I recognize myself for 3 minutes to talk about space business, space commerce, rapidly growing, thousands of new small and medium-sized satellites being deployed to low Earth orbit yearly. This office has been designated as the organization for tracking and managing those assets, the small satellites. There's thousands of them, I'm told. What will the Space Commerce Unit at Department of Commerce do to count these satellites?
Yeah, there are so many, as you have said. So we are developing a space situational awareness and traffic coordination program. I think of it as like air traffic control for space. And we received $65 million last year to develop this. We're requesting another $75 million in this budget to continue that. It's on track. It is on track. We have an excellent person running the Office of Space Commerce, and that's our primary focus right now, is developing this tracking system so we can have an awareness of where all of this space satellite activity is.
Well, space commerce has been given the mandate to begin to track those assets, existing and new ones, to ensure that they don't prevent the deployment of new systems into low Earth orbit, and perhaps more importantly, that they do not inhibit civil and other space satellite deployment, as well as rocket launches for various NASA missions. Tell us how this is going to happen. This is a big task.
It is a big task. It is a big task. I think, look, space commerce is a burgeoning industry, and it's critical the U.S. leads, right, in the civilian space areas, commercial space. And so fundamentally, what we have to do is make sure the U.S. leads in that area. Developing this space situational awareness system, which we are doing, and the space traffic coordination system enables us to do that by, if you keep track of everything, it reduces collisions, it reduces problems, and creates safety. And quite frankly, it's an incentive for investors to invest in U.S. commercial space industry if we have this space trafficking system effective.
And one complicating factor is we're going to deorbit the International Space Station in 2030, and many of the commercial providers now on that station will be looking for a new home in low Earth orbit, which complicates your chore even more. Is that right or wrong?
That's right. It's a balance. That we have to balance these interests.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Raimondo, I want to talk about the United States Economic Development Administration, which is housed in the Department of Commerce. EDA has an important role in spurring job creation and economic diversification in communities that have suffered decline and stagnation as the industrial economy rapidly evolves. That's true in my district. You know that in northeastern Pennsylvania, Our economy has been bumping along since the decline of coal mining, since NAFTA, which bestowed benefits and burdens across our nation, but unevenly across our geography. And we suffered a lot of manufacturing loss in northeastern Pennsylvania because of NAFTA, and legislative efforts since then have not fixed that problem. But EDA is one of the solutions, and I'd like to hear, by the way, thank you for visiting Pittston in northeastern Pennsylvania. You know that Pittston Mayor Mike Lombardo has done amazing things to bring back that small city, and we want to do more. But I'd like to hear broadly, what key economic development needs are you hearing most often as you go around the country visiting places like Pittston?
Yeah. I had fun going, so I enjoyed the visit. What I hear, and it's across all of your states, right? It's coal-affected communities, NAFTA-affected communities. Where I'm from in Rhode Island, we used to, jewelry manufacturing capital of the country, all withered away. So what I hear is a need for U.S. manufacturing. There's something special about manufacturing jobs. They're high-paying. They don't require a college degree. There's a job for everyone in the facility. People say, like, why can't we make more in America? That's why it's so exciting for me when I'm out in Arizona, where I recently was with TSMC and Intel. It's amazing. Tens of thousands of manufacturing jobs are brought about by the CHIPS Act. I hear the constantly need for retraining, which is why I created the Good Jobs Challenge when I became secretary. People want to work. You know, and put yourself in the shoes of a 42-year-old woman who's just been a retail clerk her whole career, or a waitress and got put out of work in COVID. She can't retire. She wants to work, but she needs skills. She needs digital skills or AI skills or something. So a desperate need for retraining and a desperate need to invest in infrastructure that will attract companies. And you see that, you know, in Pittston or wherever. I mean, sometimes you might have a vacant mine or a vacant manufacturing facility. They have to be resuscitated to new uses, and that takes money. EDA, by the way, spends money on all of that. We're investing in infrastructure to retrofit these buildings. We're investing in job training. The Recompete program, Recompete is about helping the most distressed communities. And those are the ones that are the hardest, and they take a lot of investment, but it's worth it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Klein?
Is it me, Mr. Chairman? Thank you. Madam Secretary, I'm concerned about the department's handling of a longstanding issue over imports of Vietnamese plywood into the United States.
Okay.
2 companies with operations in my district have been assessed countervailing duties over imported Vietnamese plywood in 2021 and 2022, even though the department had previously assured importers that plywood imports with a Vietnamese core would not be subject to such duties. This retroactive decision issued in 2023 has had significant negative impacts on U.S. companies which imported this product in good faith. And moreover, these companies have independently audited proofs that the plywood they imported originated in Vietnam and not China, which was the target. Yet the department refuses to consider such proofs and merely relies on the failure of Vietnamese exporters to satisfactorily respond to commerce questionnaires. So the ultimate issue is, where did the product come from, Vietnam or China? And this matter is currently in a pending administrative review with an interim decision expected by July 30th. So I'd ask you to hopefully accept and consider the independent audits to resolve this matter, and if you have any response.
Yeah, just a couple things. You know, this is a quasi-judicial process with which I can't really interfere.
Okay.
The concern, which we see a ton of, is China dumps into Vietnam, Vietnam into the United States, and it's an end run around our anti-dumping regulations. But it's appropriate for me to look at it and certainly have my staff reach out to you. We're not after, you know, we don't want to hurt your local company. We do want to hurt China trying to get around our rules.
Completely agree. Just ask for a fair evaluation of the evidence being
I will do
forward.
it.
Thank you. With regard to counterfeit Chinese vapes, we'll stay with China. In the December 2023 press release announcing FDA and CBP's joint seizure of illegal e-cigs with a retail value in excess of $18 million, the FDA said that many of these unauthorized e-cigs were intentionally misdeclared as various items, such as toys or shoes, and listed with incorrect values. So if shipping containers full of illegal e-vapor products from China are misdeclared at U.S. ports of entry, either as to the country of origin to avoid the 25% China tariff, or as to the product category to avoid the 2.6 e-vapor tariff, this would represent criminal violations of custom laws on an industrial scale. But it would also amount to massive fraud on the U.S. Treasury in terms of lost tariff revenues. I'm assuming you're aware of how big this problem is. What steps have you taken with FDA and CBP to address the problem and recover those lost revenues?
Yeah. Once again, it's a detail, and I can get back to. This is mostly a CBP issue, I will say. I mean, we work closely with CBP. We furnish them all the data that they need, and we cooperate with them. But this is, what you're talking about is primarily in their remit.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Ms. DeLauro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With regard to dumping, I think closing the de minimis loophole is something that ought to be considered as well. I think that's within the USTR realm. But with regard to that, and talking about countering unfair trade practices, what role does the department have in confronting China's manufacturing dominance through trade policy? And working with the USTR to address trade issues that have concern with allies, partners, with adversaries, what is that? How, if at all, is the department working with USTR on some of these?
Yeah. We work hand in glove with them on so many issues. I want to say I'm very concerned about this. It's no secret that China's economy is growing slower than it has and that they have wanted to. And it's also no secret that their strategy is to crank up production. They now represent about 30% of the world's manufacturing output. They could decide to go to 60% to keep Chinese people working, which would be disastrous for the global economy. So I worried greatly, Congresswoman, about the possibility that they do that and dump their cheap products, whether it's electric vehicles, legacy semiconductor chips, critical minerals. The list is long if they crank up production and dump it on the world market. So we're working very closely with USTR to try to identify where are we most vulnerable and what actions could we take. One thing specifically that we've done at Commerce, we just used the Defense Production Act to do a mandatory survey about legacy semiconductor chips produced in China. We're trying to find out where are these legacy Chinese chips in U.S. supply chains, and do we see any evidence of China dropping the price, which would distort the market and make it impossible for U.S. chip companies to compete? So I'm laser focused on that area in particular.
Yeah. Well, it's the emerging markets as well. They're exporting manufacturing and technical standards to emerging markets and certain technology efforts, as you pointed out, information, communications, advanced manufacturing, and obviously you're aware of the challenge, and I take it from your comment that the department is preparing and designing what structures you need, and again, what resources you may need to be able to counter.
That's exactly right.
Counter that effort. Just very, very quickly, the $4 million for global markets, the ITA request for that. Which markets does ITA see as strategic for this purpose, and how will it be addressed?
Africa. I was just in Kenya. Extremely important. China's all over Africa. We have to show up. And certain areas of Southeast Asia.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Clyde?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, do you think the number of illegal aliens that were counted in the 2020 census had an impact on the apportionment of the House of Representatives that we have today?
I don't think so. But
I
I
don't think
don't-
so.
But I don't have a great answer for you.
Okay. Can you get me a great answer?
What do you think?
I think it did. I think it really did. At a I mean, if we're looking at over 20 million illegals in this country, then I think that it had a significant impact.
Yeah, my job, though,
Well,
isn't,
let
go
me,
ahead.
you mentioned that the census is counting the whole number of persons in each state. I agree with you. It's what the 14th Amendment says. But it also says in Section 2 of the 14th Amendment, when it talks about representatives in Congress, it says the basis of representation therein shall be reduced in the portion which the number of such male citizens shall bear to the whole number of male citizens 21 years of age in such state. Now, I know the 19th Amendment added both male and female, made it both male and female, and the 26th Amendment lowered the age to 18. But the 14th Amendment still says male citizens is the basis of, says citizenship is the basis of representation. And I'm grateful to take a clarifying action this week to prevent the marginalizing of citizens' voting power by finally requiring a citizenship question on the decennial census, and by modifying the House of Representatives apportionment to be based only on United States citizens. I look forward to voting for H.R. 7109, the Equal Representation Act, of which I am a proud original co-sponsor. Now, can you tell me a little bit about the Census Bureau's annual business survey? What is the cost of that annual business survey, and why did it go from 5-year in 2017 to 1 year?
I could probably get you the cost, but I'll have to get back to you on the exact cost.
Okay,
But
that's fine.
I do want to say something to your last question. The census's job is to identify persons living in this country. And I know from experience, I lived it, when you start to ask people about their immigration status, they then don't answer the door and won't be counted, and it will lead to inaccurate data.
Ma'am, I appreciate that, but I'm moving on to the Census Bureau's annual business survey. So my next question to you is, how much money is spent on follow-up with those businesses that do not initially respond to the Census Bureau's annual business survey? Do you have that?
I don't, but I can get it to you, but
Okay.
a great deal of money. I mean, we try to get everyone to respond.
Okay, and how do you determine who you ask?
You'd have to ask the scientists. To be clear, I don't interfere with any of this. This is statisticians figure out what's likely to lead to the best outcomes, and I
Okay.
defer to their judgment.
Okay, so then I can be assured that you'll get me that information.
100%.
Okay, thank you very much, and I yield back.
Mrs. Ming?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I look forward to voting against the bill that is called the Equal Representation Act, but literally does the opposite. And to pretend that non-citizens do not live in our communities, and that's exactly what this bill would do, pretend will only, as you mentioned, Madam Secretary, instill fear, force people into the shadows, and take critical federal funding away from every single state, red, blue, purple, rural, urban, suburban, which that's not the point of the census to count like this. In 2018, the previous administration repeatedly tried and attempted to add a citizenship question to the census, which I'm proud to say that Senator Mazie Hirono and I and others fought against in Congress and was subsequently blocked by the Supreme Court. I wanted to ask a quick question about the Minority Business Development Agency, which offers many programs and services that help businesses to grow and be competitive. I represent a diverse district in Queens, New York, where many minority-owned businesses are in many ways the backbone of our community. Secretary Raimondo, how does the fiscal year 2025 budget request ensure that those who most need the MBDA's assistance and resources can continue to access them?
Yeah, thank you. We've asked for an additional $12 million in MBDA to do exactly that. So our mission is to help business owners who are economically and socially disadvantaged, including Asian Americans, members of your district and all of your districts. So we're looking to add more offices, more staff, more service offerings, so we can be more available to these small businesses.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Elsey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, people of the 6th District, we're a very rural district. They're very worried about, in many cases, the debt of our nation being $34 trillion. And a lot of the budget requests you've asked for here are increases and some new agencies, particularly the supply chain resiliency for $37 million. Offline, not necessarily here, please give me a justification for that and what the Office of Supply Chain Resiliency intends to actually do, because once a bureaucracy grows, it's very hard to dial it back whenever it's not needed. I believe in the market. I'm just curious how this is going to help the market. So later on please send me the answer to that. But I want to talk about China again and the threat that we're facing from 4 dictatorships: Iran, China, North Korea, and Russia. And the chip issue, you know, it seems like China is controlling all the strings. Everything that they do in this country technologically is a military operation from the CCP, and everything that they do is a study on the pattern of life. So everything that's got a transponder in it, from the big cranes in the ports to the boxcars they tried to dump, which we successfully stopped, to the technology that's coming in, is a pattern of life study, which is what you do whenever you're going to study how to best attack a nation. I believe that we're already in a proxy war with China, with them using the cartels to kill 200 Americans every day as an equalizer for their one-child policy, which is about to send them into oblivion. Can you describe for me what you think the threat is from the electronics of China in the United States?
Couple things. One, I was very pleased to see Congress take action on TikTok. That's an example of TikTok being on the phones of hundreds of millions tens of millions of Americans, collecting all that data. So that was one thing. Secondly, one thing we're doing is looking into electric vehicles, connected vehicles. Chinese electric vehicles on our roads at scale could be collecting massive amounts of data on Americans, who they are, what they say in their car, where they go to, their patterns of driving. So we've opened an investigation at the Commerce Department looking at that. Also very much looking at cranes. The vast majority of cranes at U.S. ports are Chinese. Cranes are no longer, steel in the air. They're all connected, collecting data. So look, I'd say we are building the capacity of our ICTS unit at the Commerce Department and looking very seriously at all of these connected apps, whether they're games or cars or really anything that collects data on large numbers of individuals, their GPS location, where they are, where they go, their family members. I think that we need to take the threat much more seriously, and that's why we are moving out on these things.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Ruppersberger?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And there was, it was devastating for so many Maryland families and businesses, and I'm sure you know, especially for the Port of Baltimore. Last week, my colleagues and I saw in person the terrific effort underway to clean up and replace this bridge, but our state is still feeling many of the ripple effects after the collapse. Secretary, can you describe what your department has done so far to support these Maryland-based businesses? What are the department's plans for the future of this program? And how can we make sure Maryland's businesses can make it through this rebuilding process? The Maryland Port of Baltimore is one of the largest ports in the nation, and the entire United States relies on it.
Yeah. Look, my heart's with you and all those businesses and everyone there. I've talked to your governor on numerous occasions about this. By the way, NOAA and the Weather Service and our scientist team were on it right away to provide help in the immediate aftermath.
I want to say it's one of the best efforts and hopefully it will pull the United States together, Republicans and Democrats, for the benefit of our country.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that. In any event, we're reaching out, but MBDA and EDA are reaching out to the businesses in that community, working with the governor's office, working with the governor's economic development agency to see what services we can provide to those businesses. I think it's on the books already. I'm going to do an event in Baltimore with the governor, with small businesses. I'm going to go myself just to let them know all the services we have available for small businesses, figure out ways that we can help them get back on their feet.
You know, it's going to cost about $2 billion to replace it, but it's in a very unique place, and it affects the Port of Baltimore. So thank you for your cooperation and your involvement, too.
No, thank you.
Go back.
Mr. Morelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I can just talk for a moment about quantum technology. In 2000, I was at a group meeting with some national quantum experts last week, and one of them mentioned to me that in 2017, the Chinese used a satellite to send entangled particles between space and the ground. Since then, as I understand it, China has constructed a 2,000-mile quantum link between Beijing and Shanghai. Obviously, quantum technology, whether it's communications, computing, et cetera, is a huge leap forward in technology, and that we need to be at the leading edge of it. But is there a value in building, should the United States consider a significant national link between major cities that will allow us to use quantum networking?
I'm afraid I would have to research that. A quantum expert, I am not. So we could follow up on that. It is an area, look, I'll say a couple things. It's definitely frontier technology, which is why we are export controlling seriously. It's on the outbound investment screening list. We have asked in the budget for $68 million, which is an increase of $14 million at NIST to hire 41 people to develop new standards and create research partnerships for quantum. So we're really leaning in at NIST with universities to push forward on the research. Whether or not what you say is
I'd love
the
to
right
follow up
idea,
and
we
see
can
if there's some
follow up.
value
But
in-
what I can tell you is, although I don't know, the people at NIST will have an opinion, and so we should make that happen.
Okay, good. I wanted to, you mentioned earlier a real problem around the chip space, which is workforce and workforce development. Talk to me a little bit about what the department's strategy is to promote workforce development in this space so that we can, meet the needs of these businesses that are struggling.
This, by the way, this is such a huge issue. I was yesterday with the CEO of one of the biggest construction firms in America. He said that the attrition rate on their projects is 50% because they're going to competitors, that they're turning down work because they can't find enough construction workers. And his number one biggest problem is, lack of skilled workers. So we're doing a number of things. We're asking every semiconductor company before they get our money to show us their workforce plan. We're giving, as part of the money, the grant that we're giving to chips companies, a piece of it is for workforce. So, like Intel, all these companies are getting tens of millions of dollars just to do workforce. And also, we're developing a CHIPS Workforce Center of Excellence just to train people. I think this has to be a moonshot. Like, if we succeed, if we fail with this CHIPS effort, it's because we haven't taken the workforce stuff seriously enough, which is why we have a whole workforce team that reports to me just to work with colleges, universities, labor unions, high schools, to train people to go work in the semiconductor industry.
And I won't, I'll yield back in a second if I could just comment, and you don't have to respond to this, but it does seem to me, for all the talk about illegal immigration, we have hundreds of thousands of people who would like to come to the United States, like my grandparents did, to work in the United States, to fill critical jobs that we need to be successful with a low birth rate. And maybe if we worked on a reasonable, thoughtful immigration policy, we could meet some of the workforce challenges that all these companies in construction and healthcare and hospitality, and the list goes on, that we're desperately going to need. So thanks for your comments always, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Madam Secretary, you have been very generous with your time and your opinions.
Hopefully not too generous in my opinions.
We thank you for giving us this time together.
Thank
We will look at your budget request in detail as we proceed. So thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Lots of good things happening in a difficult world that we all of a sudden realize we live in. So thank you for your work. This concludes today's hearing. We want to thank Secretary Raimondo for being here today with us. Without objection, members may have 7 days to submit additional questions for the record. The subcommittee stands adjourned.